Hey everyone, welcome to this week's Azure Infrastructure Update, the 24th of January. And actually quite a lot of updates this week, so I'm going to have to go pretty quick to fit this in a decent amount of time. As always, if this is useful, please go ahead and give this video a like and subscribe, comment and share. A couple of new videos this week. I did kind of an overview and getting started of Azure PowerShell. And then just a quickish guide on what is a composite SLA, what does it mean when I depend on multiple services, or maybe I can go to alternate services if there's a problem, and how that affects my overall service level agreement. So getting into the new features, so on the compute side, number of kind of Azure Kubernetes service updates. So firstly, in preview is this new driver for Azure Key Vault with my Azure Kubernetes service cluster. And essentially what this enables me to do is fairly simply, using this driver that I can go and get from GitHub, I make this available on the worker nodes in my node pool. And now as part of my deployments to the pods, I can actually make certain vaults now have their secrets, key certificates, just natively available to the workloads running inside the pod. They can kind of view those secrets, for example, as simply as something on a file system. So it's this new capability, it's in preview, that lets me basically project things from my Azure Key Vault into the pods running in my AKS cluster. There is now the generally available AKS Uptime SLA option for private clusters. Remember, an AKS private cluster just has all those management IPs in this regular private RFC 1918 IP space, and then uses private endpoints to actually get to your worker nodes. So what this lets me do now is, by default with AKS, the management plane, remember you don't normally pay for that. Well, because you don't pay for it, you get a service level objective, i.e. not a money-backed SLA. So that free SLO, I think, is 99.5%. Well, if I opt for the Uptime SLA, if it's using zone redundancy, I get a 4 nines. If I'm not using zone redundancy, I get a 99.95% SLA. So it's a switch I can use, the --uptime -SLA option when I create the cluster, which now gives me that financially backed SLA. So if I need that, that's now available for private clusters as well. It was already available for non-private AKS clusters. There's now this AKS Automatic Upgrade option. So if you use AKS, you're used to the idea that, well, hey, I have to go into my cluster, I go and look at my Kubernetes service, and it's kind of this two-phase process. I have to firstly go and say, well, okay, I'll go and look at my cluster. What is my actual kind of cluster configuration right now? Well, I can see my Kubernetes version, and I'm already running the latest. But I would have to go and upgrade the cluster. Once I upgrade the cluster, I would then have to go to the node pools, and I've also already upgraded mine, but I would then have to go and, for example, hey, upgrade my node pools, and it's saying, well, you've already done that. But what we can now do with this new feature is I can essentially say, hey, look, I just want you to automatically upgrade. So there's actually different levels I can do this as well. So if we go and actually look at the document, so we jump over. So if we go, oh, it didn't open. Let's try that again. Open up. There we go. Third time's a charm. So if we actually scroll through to the document, I can set the auto upgrade channel. And so what you can now do is you can say, hey, look, the default is none. I have to go and manually upgrade the cluster. But then I can also do things around, well, hey, look, there's patch, the latest supported patch version, but it keeps the same minor version. Stable, hey, the latest supported patch version on the minor version. And then rapid, get the latest supported patch release on the latest supported minor versions. There's all these different kind of options you can do. So go and read the document. Obviously, I'll link to it as usual. But you can kind of pick what you want for that auto upgrade. So that's now available. You can go and turn that on the cluster configuration. This is preview. Linux Diagnostic Agent has a 4.0 version. So there's a number of different features they've lit up with this. There's now this automatic Azure Monitor metric sync, so that's now automatically enabled. There's support for Ubuntu 20.04. There's just performance improvements and bug fixes, etc. So that's again in preview. On the networking side, the Azure Monitor Network Insights is now generally available. This is agentless. You can just go and see this. So if I actually go over, if I quickly go and just go to my Azure Monitor, remember we have all these different types of insights, which are those curated set of views on metrics, on logs that matter most to that service. Well, now we can see networks, and I can see various things. I can see the network health, I can see connectivity, traffic. So that's now available to you to kind of just go and leverage to get better insight into what's happening in your network environment. On the storage side, so Azure Backup Customer Managed Key is now generally available. So this is the encryption at rest on your backup vault. So now instead of the default platform managed key, I can actually say, hey, I want to use this as that key encryption key. Remember, there's the data encryption key that's actually used to encrypt the data on disk. This is the key encryption key that's used to protect that key. So now I can actually select my own key that's stored in Azure Key Vault to use, so I just have more control on that encryption key. Also now, Azure Managed Disks has integration with Azure Backup. Now the way this is working is it's not taking backups of the managed disk and copying it to a Key Vault. What essentially is happening here, if I think about it, is I have my managed disk, and what we're really doing is we think about taking a snapshot. So with a snapshot, we can kind of think about it happening in place, and we support incremental. Now the first snapshot's going to obviously be the full size of the managed disk, but then we can take incremental snapshots where it would just be the delta. Now those incremental snapshots, it doesn't matter what storage the managed disk is, it could be premium, whatever, it's going to store the snapshots on kind of that standard HDD. And it's only storing the delta, so it's very efficient. Now what the Azure Backup integration is, it's really the orchestrator for the snapshots. So I'll create a policy, I'll apply that policy, and the policy is going to dictate, well, kind of when to take the snapshot and the retention. So it's going to automatically go and take the snapshots of the managed disk, and it's going to then retain and then delete them once it falls out of that retention window. So this Azure Managed Disk integration with Azure Backup is Azure Backup is acting as the orchestrator of the snapshots. It's not copying the data into the vault, it's keeping them near, so it's going to be a very fast restore experience, and it's going to use that incremental capability using standard hard disk drives, so it's really as cheap as possible, and I'm just paying for the delta, but it's going to delete the old snapshots based on that policy I create in Azure Backup. Now, because this is happening at the managed disk level, it's going to be crash consistent. Remember, ordinarily we think about, well, that managed disk is connected to a virtual machine. This is taking a snapshot just at the disk. It is not telling the VM to call volume shadow copy service. It's not flushing anything out to disk. So this was a crash consistent snapshot. The benefit though, it doesn't have any impact on the VM. It's not causing any workload on the VM to flush things out or pause things. It's completely transparent. If I need app consistent, then I still need to do something inside that VM, a different solution that would, if it was Windows, flush things out. If it was Linux, call a pre kind of script to flush things out, take that copy and then start things up again. So what this is announcing is kind of that, hey, just Azure Managed Disk in limited preview. integration with Azure Backup to manage that snapshot creation, completely transparent to the OS. Azure SQL Database now has an always encrypted with secure enclaves option. Remember, this is built on kind of that Intel SGX and the DC series of virtual machines. Always encrypted normally means that it's on the client side, it encrypts the data. So on the database, it's always encrypted. If I'm a DBA, all I can see is encrypted data. Then that's good from a security perspective, but it limits some of the things I can actually do at the database level because all it has is encrypted stuff. So what this now lets me do is, because of these secure enclaves, I can actually run a portion within Azure SQL Database that can now actually get the plain text of that data, perform various manipulations on it, so I could now get better levels of operations, better functionality, but I'm still keeping that full security. The rest of SQL could not go and look inside that secure enclave. And again, I'll link to it in the description. The article has kind of a cool picture of this that actually shows me that whole idea of, normally we have the client driver that does that encryption and we have the ciphertext only stored in the database. But now if I use this new enclave option, I can actually have this enclave where it can go and decrypt it, so I can run some more interesting server-side operations without really risking the security of my data to everything else going on. So a pretty nice capability, again in preview. Azure CosmosDB now has an AZ.CosmosDB PowerShell module. Again, linking below, there's a whole set of cool commandlets and demonstrations you can use, but it really exposes the full set of functionality of the CosmosDB RESTful API. And there now is AZ support as well. So the way this works with CosmosDB, when I add another region, I can select now, hey, I want to have AZ support. For existing regions, you'd have to actually add another region with AZ support, remove your region, add it back with AZ support, and then you could go and remove other regions. So it's when I add an additional region, I now have the option to turn on availability zones. So that is now in GA. I can now disable the storage account shared key access. So this is in preview. So remember, when I have a storage account, ordinarily that storage account has these massively powerful keys. You have 2 keys. And with those keys, I can do control plane operations and data plane. So remember, the data plane, we have things like blob, queue, table, and file. Now those shared keys, again, can do anything. So they're really something we don't want to use if we can avoid it. So then also we have kind of Azure Active Directory. And today at the data plane, both blob and queue support AAD data plane permissions as well. So what's now possible is you can say, hey, storage account, I do not want you to allow access via those shared access keys. So then I can only access via Azure AD. Now, remember what that means is there's also things like shared access signatures for both account and service. Well, shared access signature is signed with those shared keys, which means if I block the keys, I can't use shared access signatures either. Additionally, I cannot use AAD for table or files, so I won't be able to access those either. Only things with Azure AD I would be able to access, but it's a configuration option available to you now. If I actually go and look at, for example, a storage account, let's jump over. If I quickly jump to my storage account and I look, for example, at just anything, it doesn't matter. If I go to my configuration, so I'm looking over here, if I go to that configuration, we have this allow shared key access. You can see it's set to enabled. I can set that to disabled. It's got a little bit of information. Hey, look, notice shared access signatures will be denied. So just pay attention to that. if you go and look at the access control and you look at the roles, I can actually see what I can use for things like Azure AD. So if I look, for example, at storage blob data contributor, and I look at the permissions, notice at the top, we're looking at management plane operations. But if I scroll down, we can see data plane operations. And this is where you can see today, we only have blob and queue actually for the data. This storage file service files is just at the share level, but not actually permissions on the actual content. So that's where, hey, if I'm gonna turn off that ability to now use that shared access key, realize I can only have blob and queue data that's going to be accessible, and I'd have to go and set up those Azure AD permissions. But if I want to really start improving my security, hey, that's now in preview. Miscellaneous, there's a whole bunch of these. There's this new summary view for resources. You may have kind of discovered this already. If I jump back over to here, actually, I'll start off just looking at kind of all resources. So if I go, actually I'll go home, services, I've lost my all, there you go, all resources. Normally we get this kind of big list of stuff. On the far right, where I've got list view, I can change this to summary view. And then I get these different summarized by. So I've got this geography based view to quickly see where things are based on geography. I could say, hey, look, West US. Oh, there's the resources in West US. I could change it to now show by resource group, and all of these things I can click on and dive into. I could see it by type. I could see it by subscription. Also, when I'm looking at certain types of resources as well, so if I go to virtual machines, so here I've got things like group by location. So I'm grouping it by East US, South US, etc. I can do various types of things over here as well. But really in that all resources view, I just quite like that. I don't know if everyone knew about it. Kind of now I can see by geography and other types of grouping. Azure Sentinel now supports dedicated clusters. If we think about, remember, what is Azure Sentinel? Azure Sentinel essentially sits on top of Log Analytics Workspace. So I have a Log Analytics Workspace, that's really that ingestion of all the logs. And then what Sentinel is doing is it brings all those logs in from various connectors and then does various analysis to give us information about that. Well, Log Analytics has actually for a while now had the idea of a dedicated cluster. So if I have over, for example, I think it's 1 terabyte a day or lots of different workspaces, I can actually create my own dedicated cluster. And inside that cluster, I can create multiple Log Analytics workspaces. Now, the benefit of that is a number of different things. Because it's my cluster, well, I can have things like a customer managed key for the encryption. I can use things like Lockbox. So Lockbox is the idea that if I need a Microsoft support person to help me, I can control that access. If I'm running queries, well, if I'm doing cross-workspace queries, they're going to be a lot faster because they're on the same cluster. So this capability to have a dedicated cluster in Log Analytics, well, now I could have Sentinel using a dedicated Log Analytics cluster. So that's the change they've made. So you get all those benefits. The idea that, hey, if I'm going cross workspace, and we still want to try and get as few workspaces as possible if we can, but now I'm going to get those benefits. I can have CMK, Lockbox, better cross workspace queries, etc. With that option. And again, it's really for big environments. I'm talking bigger than 1 terabyte a day of ingestion. There's a new Azure Monitor ITSM connector for ServiceNow ITOM. So remember, an IT service management solution. If I think about with Azure Monitor, remember we can have action groups, things I want to do. So what I can now do is I can use a secure webhook from within my action group to very nicely hook into the ServiceNow ITOM for alerts, for example, to go and actually hook into that ITSM solution. And it's also Azure AD for the authentication, so that's kind of a better secure option. There's now in GA the Azure Quota RESTful API. So if I want to, through a REST API, go and find out information about what quota I have left, maybe if I want to increase quotas, I can now do that through the REST API that's GA. This is a minor thing. Azure Diagnostics table in Log Analytics has a new overflow column. So essentially, normally there's I think it's a 500 column limit within a Log Analytics workspace. And normally for any other table, that would be plenty. But if you think about the huge variety of data types I can have with diagnostics, there were actually times it would overflow. It would go beyond those 500 columns. So what they've done is they've added a new column called additional fields for the Azure Diagnostics table, so that if it does hit that 500 column limit, it will write the rest of them to this new additional fields column. So we're never going to lose data. Finally, ASR, Azure Site Recovery, has an update rollup 3. I'm not going to go through it because of time, but again, it's linked below. Just a few things around performance and some kind of new DR options. So quite a lot of updates this week. I hope, as always, that was useful. Until next week, take care. Any questions, please comment below. Stay safe.